want a story? All right. The tune I was originally going to play was from a guy named Joe Thrift. And it's actually a fairly famous tune called Whiteface. And Joe Thrift told us a great story. But the most salient thing about it is that everybody thought his tune was named after his favorite calf. And he says, like, no, this is not true. Everybody wants it to be some fanciful thing about my favorite thing and this deep soulful connection. The truth of the matter, he was at a festival and there was a guy who had a hat on that was white. And so he said, ha, makes your face look white. And that's how he named the tune. There were no cows nearby. But he doesn't fight it too much. I heard this from him himself. Anyway, this is not that tune because I don't know it well enough. But this is an old time tune that is one of the three styles that I played at the Alaska Folk Festival just a couple weeks ago.
Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I am Kelly, today's worship associate. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome here. If this is your first time with us, we'd love to get to know you. Please sign our guest sign-in book in the foyer. For kids, we have our activity table up front. It's bustling today. Kids can also stay seated with their grown-ups. Please remember to use whisper voices when talking. That goes for all of you. If you would like to know more about our programs for youth and kids, please speak to Elizabeth Portillos, our Lifespan Spiritual Enrichment staff. After the time for all ages, kids can go out to their World Blessings class with Elizabeth. We also have a nursery down the hall for younger kiddos, and Sarah Hamoud, our nursery coordinator, can check in with them. Everyone is encouraged to come up to our Candles of Community area in the front or in the back before or during prayer meditation time to light a candle and or write your joy or sorrow in the book to be read aloud. If you are in need of pastoral care or support or a chat over coffee, or even financial assistance, please contact Revtina to set up an appointment. She will be back in the pulpit next week. Okay. We come together as a community every Sunday to pause and to worship together. Worship creates connections within, among, and beyond us. It calls us to live with wisdom, care, forgiveness, and integrity, calling us to be our best selves, the people we want to be. Our worship theme for the month of April is possibility. Today, we discuss what becomes possible with compassion as our guide, and what compassion asks of us. We are grateful for the compassion we have received and for the many opportunities we have to show compassion to others, strangers, villains, friends, our parents, our children, our spouses, and partners. Today, we will show compassion to ourselves as well. We will embody compassion, even when it's a tough sell. Amelia will now read our chalice lighting words, and Jocelyne will light our chalice.
Every day brings struggle. Every day brings joy. Every day brings us the opportunity to ease the struggle of another, to be the joy in another's life. May this flame remind us to carry our light to each other and to the world.
Previous tunes are confidence tunes. This set is more Irish traditional tunes. They have so much linked in common it can be hard to tell the two apart. Ironically, these are the more dancey Irish tunes, but I like them a lot.
Okay, thank you again. Renae It's time for the message.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Patrick. I want to get up and dance. What's that? Should I go ahead? So my talk actually continues on a little bit from the poem that someone shared in the book, so thank you for writing that. So the philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote that, quote, "Compassion means examining and bearing consciously the burden that our century has placed on us." It's a striking claim, but one that I think many of us recognize intuitively. Compassion in this sense is not simply a feeling, it's a way of orienting ourselves toward others, particularly toward those who are suffering, harmed, or made vulnerable. It asks us to recognize that suffering as real and to respond to it as something that requires acknowledgement. So within this community, that orientation is expanded even further. We are called not only to respond to those who are directly harmed, but also to those who experience that harm indirectly through fear, identification, or just proximity. Compassion becomes not just an interpersonal response, but a social and ethical one, shaping how we understand our responsibilities to one another. So here's an example of what I mean. The World Press Association has already announced its photo of the year for 2026. And if you've seen it, you probably know why. And did I just see a show of hands? How many of you have seen it? No? Okay, great. So I get to show it to you. Okay, awesome. So I just learned about it on NPR, so that's fair. Yeah. So the photo is called "Separated by Ice" and was taken inside one of the few US federal buildings where photographers were granted access. So one of the criteria for this award, of course, is technical skill in taking the photo. There's also the composition, the unique angle, good editing, just enough, not too much. The photo must also be powerful. And the power of this photo is in the compassion that it elicits. The photo depicts a man being detained and separated from his family. The photographer who captured this image showed up day after day to a federal courthouse to document what was happening and communicate it to the world. This photo is one moment captured among countless others. So one of my favorite writers and thinkers, Susan Sontag, reminds us that images of suffering ask something of us, not just to feel, but to deeply consider what it is that we are seeing. And it is through deep consideration that photos chosen for awards like this may move us to compassionate activism. It's out of compassionate activism that, for example, the Unitarian Universalist Association launched an effort called You the Vote to address the injustice that is portrayed in the scene captured in that photo, and of course, for so many other acts of oppression and discrimination being enacted now. And yet there are moments when what we encounter do not fit easily within that framework, when what we see is confusing or difficult to even name. In those moments, compassion does not always feel steady or clarifying. It can feel uncertain or even destabilizing because it asks us to respond to suffering while we are still trying to understand what we are seeing, who's being harmed, and what a just response might require. And many of us have experienced this in very ordinary ways. We see something troubling in the news, we feel compelled to act, so we call a senator, we write an email or make a donation, and these are real actions and they really matter. But they can also leave us with a lingering uncertainty. Was it enough, or does it actually address what's happening? It's often that our attention can shift in unhelpful ways. At least it's true for me. Instead of clarifying the situation, we might turn inward, asking ourselves those questions rather than asking more directly what's happening and what it demands of us. And that kind of self-questioning can just waste energy instead of bringing us clarity. So I found myself sitting with a different question, not what compassion is, but what it asks of us. I don't have a simple answer, but I'd like to think about the question with you this morning. Because whatever compassion is, it doesn't exist in the abstract. It takes shape in how we respond to what's happening around us. Sometimes what is happening around us is difficult to look at directly. So I want to begin there with specific events that have been, for me, difficult to look at. And one unprecedented injustice that occurred on the national stage, enacted by the government against two individuals, occurred 3 months ago in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Wait a minute. We're not going to start there like this is the first time something like this has happened.
I'm sorry, is that me?
Yes, it's you. And no, this is not new. If we're going to talk about this honestly, we need to go back. For example, in 1914, in Ludlow, Colorado, coal miners went on strike against the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. They were demanding better wages, safer working conditions, and the right to organize. They were evicted from their homes and forced to live with their families in tent colonies set up along the outskirts of the mines. Those were not just workers, these were entire communities, women, men, and children living together in those camps. On April 20th, the Colorado National Guard, along with company guards, surrounded the colony. What followed was a day-long assault. Machine gun fire was directed into the tents. By the end of the day, the camp had been set on fire. When the fires burned out, the bodies were found. In total, at least 25 people were killed. This was not chaos. It was not a moment of confusion. It was the use of organized force against civilians who were seen as a problem to be managed. And at that time, there were people who justified it. There were people who said it was necessary to restore order, to protect property, to maintain stability. That language should sound familiar. Because when we look back at events like Ludlow, it is easy to see what was done. What is harder is recognizing how those actions were explained, defended, and absorbed into the normal functioning of society. And that is part of why it still matters.
But I was going to start with Minnesota.
I know.
Okay. Well, thank you, me. It's unexpectedly helpful. And I do want to stay with that for a moment because one of the things that is easy to miss when we look back at an injustice like Ludlow is not only what happened, but what followed. The violence itself was terrible. It was widely reported, and it shocked the nation. People saw the images, read the accounts, and recognized that something had gone terribly wrong, and that recognition was crucial. Public outrage did not undo what had been done, but it did begin to shift what people were willing to accept. The suffering of those miners and their families did not remain isolated in that moment. It became part of a broader movement for labor rights, one that insisted that workers were not expendable, that their lives and safety had to be protected. Is anyone here familiar with this event, Ludlow? Yeah, okay. Over time, that pressure in the form of protests, demonstrations, and the Remember Ludlow rallying cry helped contribute to a growing understanding that the use of force against civilians could not simply be accepted without consequence. And that change did not happen all at once, and it didn't happen without resistance, but it did happen in part because people were willing to see what had occurred and to respond to it, not by looking away, but talking about it and speaking up. And that's important for how we understand compassion. The response to Ludlow was not simply a feeling, not just sympathy or grief. It was a kind of collective recognition that something unacceptable had taken place, and that recognition became the basis for action. Compassion in that sense did not resolve the situation or make it easier but it did help people decide that certain things should not continue. So when we turn our attention to the present, rather just 3 months ago, for example.
Or we could stay with the past a little longer.
Are we doing this again?
Yes, just briefly, because Ludlow was not the end of this unfortunate pattern. In 1932, thousands of World War I veterans traveled to Washington, D.C., asking for early payment of bonuses that they had been promised. They were unemployed, struggling during the Great Depression, and they set up camps to wait for a response. The federal government sent in the U.S. Army. Under General Douglas MacArthur, troops used cavalry, tear gas, and fire to clear the camps. Veterans were beaten, their shelters burned, and families driven out. The images of all of this spread quickly. The idea that soldiers had been used against veterans, against citizens, shocked the country. Public opinion shifted. Within a few years, Congress approved early payment of those bonuses, and the political cost of using military force against civilians became much harder to ignore. And in 1970, at Kent State University, students gathered to protest the Vietnam War. The Ohio National Guard was deployed. They opened fire. 4 students were killed and 9 were wounded. The photos circulated almost immediately. The reaction was immediate and widespread. Hundreds of campuses shut down in protest. Public debate intensified. Trust in the government's handling of the war eroded further. It did not end the war overnight, but it changed how the war was seen and what people were willing to accept. In each of these moments, the violence captured the attention of the U.S. population, and the response couldn't be ignored by the government. People saw what had happened. They named it. They refused to let it pass without consequence, and over time, that refusal shaped what was possible, what was permissible, and what could be justified.
Okay, I see what you're doing, but I would like to talk about Minnesota. Yeah.
I know.
So when we turn our attention to what has happened more recently.
You are talking about Minnesota. You're just not seeing it in context yet.
This is becoming a pattern.
Yes. And that matters. Because each of the moments we've just looked at was experienced at the time as immediate, urgent, and in some ways unique or unprecedented. People responded to what they saw in front of them. They protested, organized, spoke out, demanded change. But what gives those moments their lasting significance is not only what happened or even how people responded in the moment. It's that over time, they came to be understood as part of something larger. Not isolated incidents, but recurring possibilities. Not anomalies, but patterns that required recognition before they could be addressed. And that recognition is not automatic. It has to be made. It has to be insisted on.
Okay. Yeah.
So, when we talk about Minnesota, we're not just talking about a single event. We're talking about how we understand it, what we notice, what we name, and what we are willing to see. I'll let you take it from here.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye. All right. Well then, let's look at it with a more well-rounded perspective this time. And before we do, I want to hold on to something that runs through each of these moments. None of these events in isolation determined the future. What mattered was what followed. How people responded, what they were willing to name, and what they refused to accept. So when we turn to Minnesota, we are not looking at something that exists outside of that history. We're looking at something that asks the same questions those earlier historic moments asked. What do we see, and what are we willing to do with what we see? We don't determine how every situation resolves, but we can acknowledge what we see and say it clearly, as many have in recent No Kings rallies, for example. We vote in the elections that are quickly approaching, and we can hold on to and support one another. And many of us are, of course, are doing these things, showing up, speaking clearly, refusing to let events like this pass without a response. What we are experiencing can feel unprecedented, but history tells a different story. Moments like this, moments that feel shocking, destabilizing, have happened before, and they have been followed by change. Not because the events were in any way justified, of course, but because people refused to accept them. So, what happened in Minnesota? In January of this year, during a federal immigration operation in Minneapolis, 2 people lost their lives. Renae Nicole Macklin-Good was shot on January 7th. Alex Jeffrey Preddy was shot on January 24th. These events took place during a large-scale federal enforcement effort that brought a significant number of agents into the area and led to multiple confrontations. Exactly 3 months and 2 days later, that's today, there are ongoing efforts to reclaim or reframe what had happened. But 2 lives were taken, lives that extended into families, relationships, and communities in the course of an operation carried out in the name of law and order. And the response to that has already begun. ICE funding has been challenged, and public pressure has begun to shape the next steps. That doesn't mean the situation is resolved or that there will not be resistance, but it does mean the response is already shaping what happens next. And that changes how we understand that photo that I showed you at the very beginning. The image is not just a record of what happened, it is part of the response to it. And that response is still unfolding. So to conclude, these events raise the same questions we have been discussing, questions about power, responsibility, and the use of force. This is where compassion becomes more demanding. It's a matter of acknowledging what has occurred and resisting the impulse to move past it too quickly. Earlier, I mentioned the ways people responded to events, like in the 20th century events specifically, like Ludlow, Bonus Army, Kent State, and these are only 3 examples of many others. There's, of course, the repression of civil rights activists, the American Indian Movement activists, United Farm Workers Union, and many, many more. The responses to government abuses did not begin with ideological certainty. They began with recognition. So if compassion asks anything of us, it is not that we are comfortable, but that we remain engaged, continue to care, and allow that care to shape what happens next. Thank you.